Hello everybody and welcome back to another CB Show Tunes tutorial. Now today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be setting up the visual sensor for our AI behavior. So, as you can see, our AI cannot detect us when we're behind it. If I move in front of it though, it actually can detect us and it will keep chasing us until I leave a certain distance from it. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Alright. So, the first thing we want to do is set up our zombie character. Now, for this, all you need to do is add a sphere collider. So just go over to Add Component, Add Sphere Collider. The next thing we want to do is add a visual sensor script on here. Now, I know, obviously, I got the script, you don't. That's okay, we can make this. So, we're going to go over to our scripts folder. And you're going to simply right-click, go over to Create, and go over to C#. If you don't have the scripts folder, that's okay. You can go over to your project panel, simply right-click, go over to Create Folder, whatever, So we're going to go over here, and I'm going to go and create that C# script. So C# script, and you can call it whatever you want to call it. I called it Visual Sensor for the heck of it, but whatever. So we're going to open that up, and there's a lot to cover here, but we'll knock it out as fast as possible. Alright, at the top, we're going to require a component of our base AI controller. So if we're using this visual sensor, we need to have this base AI controller. Otherwise, it's not going to run. And the next thing we want to do is we want to have two float values. We have vision radius and vision range. Vision radius is the angle value that we're going to be using for detection, and vision range is the distance we're going to be using. The next thing we have is a public sphere collider, or sphere collider, and this is going to be our sensor collider. This is going to be what we're going to be using for detecting the player. And lastly, we have a public vector 3 called offset, and this is going to be setting the offset of the sensor collider. I do have this base controller AI variable at the bottom. That one's, I guess, technically important, but it's not really. This one we're going to be using to grab a hold of our base AI controller, and we're going to be setting if we're aware or not. That way we can say, okay, do we chase the target or do we not chase the target? Alright, inside the editor updates, this is just to make your life easy. We're going to be checking, So what we're doing here is we're simply going to be grabbing our sensor collider. So if you head back over into Unity and select like your zombie, and you already saved your variables, this right here is what we want to use for our sensor collider. It is the new sphere collider that we created, and the reason why we have it set as a public vector here is so we can simply click and drag and drop, versus it using, say for instance, this collider up here. If this was a trigger, we can use a specific collider. Okay, so inside here we're just simply setting the center, the radius, and if it is a trigger. And we could just plug in those values of offset for our center and vision range for our radius. Now I know what you're saying. Oh my god, we're using a collider because that's just too basic and I want to be able to use a specific angle. Trust me, we'll get there. So, inside of the casting or void start function, we're going to simply cast to this AI component. So, all we're doing is we're saying we're going to get this AI variable, and we're going to make sure that it is on the game object, or we're getting the AI controller on this game object. For our detection, we have three different properties: on trigger stay, on trigger exit, and a boolean called detect player. So on the on trigger stay property, we're going to simply ask if our other tag is equal to player. If it is, we want to first run this boolean called detect player, and we're going to be plugging in the value of this other object, so other.transform. We're also going to grab our AI controller, so our base AI controller, and we're going to be setting if we can see the player or not. Now, inside the previous tutorial, we didn't have this boolean, so I'm going to head back over here, and I'm going to roll up to the top, and as you can see, we added this new boolean value. It's a public bool, and we're going to be setting that equal to canSeePlayer. We also want to add this to our void update function, and you can add this pretty much anywhere. I only added it to my look function, but you can add it up here and then return if it's equal to false. It really is up to you. As long as you stop the motion, then you're good. Alright, so let's go back over to our visual sensor. Now, at the bottom here, we're going to say if our AI can see the player. So if we can see the AI, or can see ourselves, then we want the AI to basically set our target value in our base AI controller as this game object that we hit. If we go over to our void on trigger exit, we want to now say, okay, if we can still, or if we can't see the player. So if you notice this little exclamation point before that, that means not. So we're going to say if we cannot see the player, then what we're going to do is we're going to set our AI target equal to null. Now I know what you're saying. Why are we using this right here in this function instead of this function? Well, the reason why is we want this collider to detect if we can see the player. If we can't see the player from this target or this collider, then we want it to send that information to the player just in case we're using another sensor node like hearing later on. Alright, and lastly we have a boolean called detect player. Now inside this boolean we're going to be using a transform as our variables or condition, and we're going to call that transform target. Now, what we want to do is we want to get the target direction. Now, how we do this is we're going to be grabbing our target.position plus our offset value. Then we're going to subtract our transform position. So we're going to be getting the difference between that target and ourselves. Then we're going to create a float called angle. Now here's where all the magic happens. We're going to make this angle equal to our vector3 angle from our current positions of forward, comparing it to our target direction. So as you can see, right here, right here. Now, if our angle is less than or equal to our vision radius, so if our angle is 45 degrees or 90 degrees or whatever you set your vision radius, then we're going to detect that is true. But we also want to make sure that our distance is within our vision range. So we're going to make sure that our target dir.magnitude is less than or equal to our vision range. Now keep in mind this is a double check, but it's always best to have those double checks inside there. And then of course we put otherwise, we're going to return false. So basically if this all equals true, we're going to go true, otherwise false. Lastly, inside the script, this is just for your preference. You don't have to have this. I created a gizmos.color, and this color is going to be equal to red. You can set it to whatever color you want. And we're also going to be drawing a wire sphere. And from that, we're just simply going to be setting its position here at our transform.position plus offset, and making its radius our vision range. So I'm going to hit Control S, and we're going to head back over into Unity, and we're going to do a couple things here. So make sure that you do grab your sphere collider that you created and drag and drop it on there. If I decide to change my vision range, as you can see, it changes the collider as well. If I come down here and start trying to mess with these things, if I do sit there and adjust any other variable, it will switch it back. So keep that in mind. You can also change your offset here as well, and you can also see it updating inside real time. So that's awesome. Our vision radius, we can simply change that as well. I don't have it set up to show you it just yet, but that's okay. Lastly, before we actually get started with testing this out, I want you to go back over to your damage script that we created inside of a couple tutorials ago, I believe. And what I want you to do is I want you to actually remove the on-trigger enter, because what I found out is that since we have this sphere collider as a trigger, whenever I shot into it, it would sit there and activate this trigger, and that just doesn't work because we want it to be able to interact with the enemy. So unless you want to go through the fun part of adding in different layers and setting this sphere collider up as a separate entity, then that's fine leaving that inside there, but I would advise just going with the on collision enter, just for personal preference. Okay, so I believe we got everything taken care of. Yep, so we're going to press play, and let's go ahead and see what happens. So the AI is coming after me. If I go and run to the other side of the map now, it should stop and go back where it needs to be. Now I can sneak up behind the AI. Great. And if I move in front of it now, it should be able to detect me. There we go. I just realized my vision range is so small. Alright, awesome. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out some other videos. If you have any questions, make sure to leave a comment inside the comment section below, and I'll be happy to get to that as soon as possible. If you have any ideals to this game that you want me to add, take away, any aesthetics that you think I need to change, feel free to go ahead and add those as well. Any form of gun choices as well. Alright, I'll see you guys later.